Welcome to the Gold Coast Arts Virtual Cinema Series. My name is Regina Gill, and I'm the founder and executive director of Gold Coast Arts. Our special guest today is D.W. Young, director of our featured documentary, The Booksellers. Gold Coast Arts film series had the pleasure of premiering his film back in January of this year, when D.W. joined us for a live Q&A along with one of the featured New York City booksellers, Adina Cohen. This charming and inviting film takes viewers inside the small and fascinating world of antiquarian booksellers and features interviews with some of the most important dealers in the business, as well as prominent collectors, auctioneers, and writers. It's both a loving celebration of book culture and a serious exploration of the future of the book. DW's films have screened at festivals around the world, including New York Film Festival, South by Southwest, Vancouver International Film Festival, Maryland Film Festival, our own, of course, and many more. His features, A Hole in a Fence and The Happy House, were released by First Run Features. Most recently, his short, A Favor for Jerry, filmed on election night 2016, premiered at the International Film Festival in Boston. D.W. was gracious enough to join us again today for an encore presentation of The Booksellers. D.W. Young, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. January seems like a very long time ago.
It's an eternity. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I didn't even think it was January. I thought it was even longer ago. And that's when I said this, I said, oh my God. So how are you? You're in a car.
I'm in a car because the internet's very fast here, and we've been staying with family out of town in Massachusetts, but the internet's terrible at the house. So
I think everybody can
makes
relate.
for a smoother Q&A experience, I've found.
Well, then thank you. And I think that's great. One of the things that I've noticed during this time, because I am a crazy book reader and always have been. I thought books were, I hate to say this, more important to me than people when I was young. I didn't speak English, was not my first language. And when I did learn, it was all about the books. And it was all, I think I learned better because of the books. We lived across the street from a library. So to hear about a film that's about books and booksellers and a passion for books is right up my alley. But I'm noticing that now more people are talking to me about the books they've read, not so much about the films they've seen because they're bombarded. They're on the screen all the time. So I think that books are having their day again. And I'm really not even so secretly pleased about that. Are you noticing that yourself?
I don't know. I mean, it makes sense on some level. I don't have any data to back it up, but I think everyone seems to have more time. And as you said, I think the deluge of the screen, which often is like we were talking about earlier, is more news than we can bear. And I also think books take you into a different place, obviously, than things you see on screen. And it's a more internal space, and it makes sense that with more time and sort of these kinds of conditions, people might turn back to reading more. I mean, whatever it takes on some level is great, but obviously I don't know that we would want to make that trade-off for all other people who are suffering, obviously. But, someone asked me in an interview a while ago, what I would take to a desert island and books or movies, like 5 books, and I had to say books. And on some practical level, a book lasts a lot longer than a movie. So if you're going to recycle it over and over again, I guess if you had, War and Peace, it would last a much longer for you than, a 2-hour film. But I think there's also something just about that kind of deep engagement that you get from books, that if you're really isolated or you're more alone, I think often speaks to you more. And fundamentally, theater going is a social activity, and
Correct.
Watching from home is just, obviously, if you're watching films, it's not the real deal, and it's unfortunate. It's sad. We were actually about to have a lot of theatrical screenings, and of course that was cut short. So ideally we would have loved more people to have seen the movie in a movie theater. I'm glad people got to see it with you guys in January, but at this point we'll have to take what we can get. So I don't know. I'd be interested to see if if people at the end of the day have any interesting statistics about this.
I'll be interested to see if the booksellers online have anything, if there's been a spike, just out of curiosity. I don't believe there are any bookstores open at this particular point. For some reason, they don't think that that's an essential activity, but that's
Yeah.
it would be to me.
Yeah, I think perhaps they'll, if maybe with reassessing some things, maybe they'll change if you limit the customers, and I will see. There might be some bookstores open somewhere in this country, I suspect. But
Well, lucky them. That's all I can say. Um, those the people who were interviewed in the film, many of them made the comment that they didn't think highly of Kindle or Nook or the electronic version of books. That the words, yeah, the story, the words are maybe the same, but the experience is not the same. I am not a person who reads online unless I have to do work. But what's your feeling about it?
oh, I totally agree. I mean, it makes sense that they would feel that way since they transact in physical books. So it would be, it sort of negates their very existence on some level of Kindle. But I think Kindle, the good news about Kindle, if you care more about physical books, is it seems to have fairly plateaued. And the sort of the initial concerns that it was going to wipe out, reading in physical books has really diminished. And there are obviously people who like to read on Kindle, and there are obviously reasons why sometimes reading an ebook, even if you read regular books, most of the time could make sense. And I think obviously for reference material and certain kinds of scholarship, having the searchability and all kinds of things like that
Of
makes
course.
sense. Like encyclopedias are obviously, a thing of the past. But I think one really interesting thing that there have been some studies done, and I think maybe bodes well for the future of the physical book too, and it ties into what you're saying, is the degree to which people have found that reading long form text via a physical book or physical object, whether it's magazine or whatever, seems to increase the reader's like ability to digest the material, what they take away from it, their engagement, all these kinds of things is increased. So I certainly feel like that sort of the degree that our minds and bodies are obviously connected in all kinds of ways we don't even understand, that would potentially be part of that experience in a way that's, offers more than just the ebook in terms of your retention of the information, maybe just how deeply you feel into the story or the narrative or the essay or whatever it is you're reading. So I think that's a very interesting thing looking towards the future that might scientifically almost add to the value of physical books beyond just nostalgic or what's perceived perhaps as a nostalgic attachment.
It's almost on some level. Somebody recently said to me, I shop online when I have no choice.
Right.
And obviously, everybody's shopping online now, if they're shopping at all. But she said, there's something about walking into a store. And she said, for me, and she described it as retail therapy. And retail therapy, there's something that it fills, if you're a shopper. If you're a reader, there's nothing like walking into a bookstore. There's just nothing like it. It will not be replaced by browsing a bunch of titles online. It just can't. And the smell of it and the feel of it, and I just understand how that feels. I also understand the uses. There it seems to me there's a place. Books should not be tossed. And I'm thrilled to hear that this and your film should certainly help once we get it out there more, to remind people about the joys of books, the physical joys of holding a book. So to return to my first question is going to be, how did you decide to do this? How did you to do this homage, this ode to books? How did you do that?
Well, so that's a question I'm asked very often.
I'm
So
sure.
I've
I've
pretty
looked up
ready.
for interviews, so I didn't want to repeat, but I said, you know what, our audience may not necessarily have seen your interview.
That's fine. Well, so the project originated at the beginning with our producer Dan Wexler, who, in addition to doing film work here and there, is a prominent rare book dealer in New York with Sanctuary Books. So he's been living in this world for quite some time. He knows a lot of people. He's got, quite a vast amount of experience. And he, had the idea some years ago that someone should make a documentary about the rare book world because it had never been done. He felt, as hopefully the film now, you know, represents, that there were many really interesting, fascinating people doing really sort of unrecognized things that deserve to be, you know, recorded. And so Judith Mizraki, who's the other producer, and my wife, and we've often worked together in the past on projects. So we had worked with Dan, or she had worked with Dan on something, and we'd all become friends. We had a mutual friend as well, the cinematographer Arlene Muller, and so we'd become friends. And Dan mentioned this to us over lunch, I think 7 years ago, and we immediately agreed, like, this is a great idea. I think it clicked with us. We had both been to the Antiquarian Book Fair in New York before. I think it was just the year before, at Dan's sort of prompting. And I think seeing the fair really helped sell us on what the visual potential of the movie might be, and then and all the
tell everybody, what fair are you talking about?
The New York Antiquarian Book Fair at the Park Avenue Armory, which is the yearly event that's sort of the biggest book fair in the United States, and arguably the most important in the world, but certainly one of the two or three. And the dealers come from all over the world, and the very highest end, and you see it in the film a bit, the very highest end, most, you know, incredible materials there. So if you're looking for bargains, it's probably not the time to go, but if you have something in mind, or you just want to experience that kind of, you know, breadth of what's on offer in the rare book trade, it's a great thing to do. So we had seen that, and I also had an aunt and uncle who had been in the book business for many years, in Philadelphia since the 60s, and as a kid I had occasionally been able to visit them and, you know, hang out in their bookstore a little bit or go in the back, and so I had a little bit of a personal, you know, love for book dealers and, you know, the hidden part of the bookstore, so to speak. So that also made me feel personally a little more, I think, enthusiastic about the project. And we were all engaged in other things, so it took a few years to kind of really dig into it. But then about 3 years ago was when we started filming the movie.
So here's my next question. How does one create a script? I mean, it's more like a jazz concert where you have riffs going here and riffs going there, and rather than a symphony where everything is sort of mapped out. Did you just, well, let you tell. How did you put all these disparate threads together?
That's a good question. I think it's sort of a half and half approach where, you know, I think going into it, I had numerous things in mind, and we had sort of settled on a few definite things. Like, we weren't going to just follow one person. We felt we didn't have that one person we felt would justify an entire film, and also we felt like showing the range of the range of this world was more interesting, especially since we had access to people in New York, and New York could almost become a little bit of a character too. That was the path we wanted to go down. So I had various, you know, some structural things in mind, and a certain idea that we would highlight a number of dealers representing different facets of the trade and spend a little more time with them, and then complement that as we went. So I think, you know, there's an outline, a plan to some degree that was very flexible going in, but then I think built into it was and this is often the case in documentaries. I think it's one of the really nice things about making documentaries is that it's an investigation. It's a process of, you know, discovery and education. And so as I went along, you know, Dan obviously understands a lot about the book trade. He was a great advisor in that respect, and he helped us also, I think, get access to some people, especially early on, that helped us have a little initial building block, you know, which really helps, and sort of some shortcuts. But I think, you know, also it's a sort of process of discovery, and as you're learning, as I'm learning more, and as we're meeting different people and they're recommending maybe you talk to this person and connections are being made, you know, it's a little more organic, but I think a lot comes from that. And so the process of making the movie is somehow then part of the movie, and I think that yields really great results potentially.
Oh, I think it yielded tremendous results. What about your sense of, because many were young, I mean, some were young, but typically the stereotype anyway of a bookseller, an antiquarian bookseller, is almost like the bookseller himself is the antique. So how is that sense of, let me get these people on camera to talk about what they do before we don't have the opportunity, and look what's just happened. So
yeah, if you the New Yorker, if you happen to go to the New Yorker now, they're running a little 5-minute short film we did about book terms, but part of that is a famous portrait of a stereotypical antiquarian bookseller by the artist Searle, using book terms to describe their body parts, essentially. So you can check that out for a little more on the stereotype of the
Okay.
bookseller for fun.
And
But,
that's great.
I think that was when we talk about our motivation 3 years ago to really start into this. I think that was part of it, was that this feeling that, and I think Dan had initially, been very um, keen on conveying his sense that there are these wonderful people he's interacted with for years who are of the older generation, that he was, maybe a few had passed, and he was fearing that if no one made the movie at some point, too many of those people would be gone, and the record of that group of people who had done things in the traditional way before the internet, and kind of represented the last of a certain generation, there wouldn't be an ability to chronicle them. So I think that was a motivating factor, absolutely, was to give those people a chance to really represent themselves, and see what was kind of unique about that long-standing tradition of the rare book trade that was fairly consistent, I think, for many, many decades, maybe a century. And then the internet obviously has changed how people are looking at books, discovering books, and evaluating them. But and so I think there are a lot of new methodologies coming in. But I think what the older, and there's a little more of a romanticism, I think, to that older method. And the book scouts are all but gone now. And so, and I think we managed to speak to some really wonderful people in New York, and a couple from outside New York, like Ed Maggs from the UK, who happened to be in town, about, their experiences.
And you also went into Jay Walker's Library of the Imagination, which completely amazed me. What was it like to be in that space, and how did you capture it?
Well, my one regret about Jay Walker's space is that we didn't have more time. He was very generous and kind to let us in and participate, because it is his private library,
I
and
know.
generally not available to the public. I think occasionally he will do an event for select reasons, or sometimes I think he lets kids in sometimes for school. I don't
Really?
know, but he's not. It's not like he doesn't let people see it, but it's essentially a private space. And so we only had so much time, and the interview took a lot of time, and we were racing to shoot the B-roll. So I didn't get any. I had really no time to personally explore the many wonders of that space. So I would certainly love to go back. And there's an amazing amount of material there. It's mind-boggling, and it's the ephemera, everything, but certainly the books. He happened to just start pulling out those jeweled bindings from that drawer, but I'm quite confident had we gone to any corner or any space of the library, equally sort of astonishing things would have materialized.
It looked like absolutely I had actually walked into one of MC Escher's pictures. It was really, and that was just on the screen. I can only imagine what it was like in person. That was a nice thing to enjoy. That was a perk, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean that's the only down. I mean, I think we went to these amazing book places. Jim Cummins' warehouses are incredible.
Yeah. Oh my God.
But again, I didn't get to enjoy them as a browser, so that's the one regret.
Well, maybe they'll invite you back as
Maybe.
a civilian. I know I would go in a heartbeat if I had that chance. Then there were the things that you must have shot that you didn't include, what you called in one interview the ephemera. And one of the things, well, why don't you talk about that? What are things that booksellers sell that are not necessarily books?
That was something that I didn't realize the degree to which it's part of the trade going in, and I think has become increasingly more prevalent. And that is really, when we say ephemera, it's not obviously, I think people know autographs might sometimes, maybe they know, are included, or and Adina Cohen at Argosy works with autographs extensively, so you see a little bit with her there in the film.
Right.
But I think people know manuscripts probably might fall into the rare book trade, but under ephemera, I mean, it's kind of anything that has historical value potentially, or academic value, that's not clearly in the art world, seems to potentially fall into the rare book trade. And so, going back to Jay Walker, I believe he has one of the 2 pairs of the original ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz in his collection. So doesn't really have anything to do with books, but it's part of our cultural history, right?
Right. And what about the Enigma Machine? Is that true that you actually?
Yeah, we and that was something I regretted not including. So that's going back to what you said.
I got my. Want to tell who doesn't know what the Enigma Machine was? Because
so the Enigma Machine was the German coding machine that they used throughout World War II for their submarines and a lot of their communications to, hide their movements from the Allies. And the English at Bletchley Park, notably with Alan Turing, but many other important, mathematicians and scientists, broke the Enigma code. And that's often cited as sort of one of the beginning key moments in the sort of the evolution of computerization. But the Enigma machines, to break the code, you actually had to obtain one, is an interesting point to have to then work off of. So there are remaining ones that are around, and one was being auctioned at the Doyle Auction Galleries when we were there, and I think you see it briefly on screen. But we had a wonderful presentation from them of an actual physical one, which I love being able to see and touch and actually see how it all worked with the different putting in the codes and everything. And it was really cool. It was going to be a whole long tangent away from the movie to get into it. Right. But it's the kind of thing, it's being auctioned at a rare book auction. And so it's fascinating to see what all falls under that.
Right. That was news to me. So I thought that people might want to hear that as well. Just on a personal note, and I know that our audience, one of the questions was also that everybody noticed that booksellers were not wearing gloves. In this, we're all wearing gloves, but
right.
and everybody thinks that you have pictures of them with these little cotton white gloves, and isn't that what they do? And Adina made it a point of saying, no, we don't wear gloves because. Do you remember why?
Yeah, well, it's more likely to damage the material. Yeah,
right.
And one other thing I left out that I subsequently maybe regret was Adam Weinberg at one point in the film did explain to someone about the gloves. But unfortunately, to get that in would have required a whole bunch of extra material to to make the moment fit, and that didn't, I think, in the end make sense. But it would have saved me answering this question many times because it's a very common question. Good reason, I guess. And yeah, so books, and I think the little more sort of complete answer, and I think Adina, if I recall, addressed this, is that books are meant to be handled by human hands. So unless they're in such unbelievably sort of fragile states where like just touching them is going to rip the paper, but then gloves aren't going to save you either. You need to have something, I don't know, very special means of doing that. But otherwise, they're really meant to be handled by human hands. They're meant to be touched, and the tactility helps you, I think. And the oils, for example, in the hand don't really bother the paper the way they do with photographs. So photographs and art, sometimes the gloves, obviously, they help avoid that transmission of the oils, but the oils are not so problematic for the books. And then your ability to feel the book really and touch the pages helps you avoid ripping it or damaging it more than, and the gloves, because you lose that, actually the chance of damage increases. So
I'm glad we managed to get that little footnote in here. The fact that you had, I personally looked forward to seeing Fran Lebowitz on screen because every time she came on, I was guaranteed to have a laugh. How did that relationship come about, and how did you get her? And I assume that was all off the cuff, all of her comments.
Oh yeah. I think Fran is by default off the cuff, and that's kind of her genius is that she can off the cuff riff on anything almost, and whether or not you agree with in a given moment what she's saying, it's incisive and it's kind of fearless, and she says what she wants to say, and I respect that tremendously. And it's hard to get away with these days almost, but she's obviously capable of it. And in terms of she is in a lot of documentaries for this reason, I think, and she's always like a wonderful counterpoint or wonderful commentator. I might almost on some level have felt like, oh, she's in a lot of documentaries. I was trying to not, avoid too common like a presence that she's, been in a lot of stuff, but she obviously has been so much about the importance of bookstores and been a great advocate for bookstores and physical books and reading and all these things. So I think on that level, she made a tremendous amount of sense. And we were looking for someone who would kind of keep us honest, that would provide a little perspective from outside the rare book trade entirely, so that she calls some stuff out a little bit, or just keeps things a little bit more connected to the non-book world and the non-rare book world. And so I think she served that purpose really wonderfully for us too.
I thought she was a tremendous addition. I mean, it was like not having her at this point, looking at the film, not having her and a few of your other. Um, I mean, there's so much that needs to be said. Everybody had such an interesting point of view, but when you had Fran on, you had almost like that pause that relieves you, and yet she makes her points, and you connect with her points because she makes them wryly and
Yeah.
humorously. So I thought that was. I don't think there's any worry about overexposure when it comes to
Yeah, no,
Fran.
I wasn't real. I'm not saying I actually was really worried, but it always gives you a moment to consider.
She
Um,
was great.
but I also think it's important. Like she helps you. Not, if you, she prevents you from getting too self-important, right?
Right,
Because
right.
she won't.
Should pop
Yeah,
a hole in
yeah,
the air bubble.
yeah.
Oh, she was terrific. Among the other things that you brought up, which I have to admit I never thought about because I've always thought about booksellers, and I accepted the patriarchy of the booksellers being mostly men. But having Adina Cohen with us at the screening and knowing that she and her sisters took over their father's bookstore and that journey and how they did it, and then you had Susan Orlean and you had some other people coming on and talking, uh, made us realize, whoa, we really, and then you had the historical context of the women, I forgot their names, the two women.
Rostenberg and Stern.
Right. And that was all news. That was wonderful. That was really and meaningful and timely. So do you feel that going forward, the inclusion of women in the history of book selling and the future of books in general, that's going to be a more important presence?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think in general, there's an ongoing and very important, um, reconsideration of women's historical role, women writers, and so on, contribution on many fronts that's been, overlooked or purposely sort of, shunted aside. And I think that's a very active and important, process that's going on right now. And I think even within the book world, the younger dealers are grappling with that, looking back and trying to. I mean, Rebecca talks, I think, very compellingly about how many women were very important. They just weren't necessarily the owners of the business. That's a good example. And there are other examples of women like that we touched. I think we were only able to show them briefly on screen, but if you would wanted to do more research, you could see what some of their many contributions were. So I felt like going in that that's an important thing that's happening now, and that I think that the degree to which the trade has been historically so male dominated, but maybe that we should partake in that to some degree as well, and also acknowledge the way it's happening in terms of the younger people doing that themselves in the book trade and looking backwards and thinking about these things. Um, and then I think it yields interesting results, as you said, that it's not all that you might think it is. And I think again that is also just part of a larger attempt to look beyond the stereotype, both looking backwards but also in the present, and that there may be some truth to the stereotype, but it's by no means the whole story, and it's maybe not even always the most interesting. It's not the most interesting part of the story in various cases. So I think the question about going forward, Heather O'Donnell talks about how when she got into the trade, that the ABA, the dealers, the breakdown between male and female dealers was, I forget what it was 80% or something. And she said, there was expected to change, but hasn't actually changed that much, apparently. I don't know all the statistics now at this point, and at some point I think that's something the people in the trade are working at and know more to speak past a certain point, than I can. But I think, that it raises questions also with diversity in the trade, how you move forward in a way that's, more representative of the current moment in time, the demographics of the country. And it's complicated though, because I think the book trade, there's no organization, there's no like, everyone's on their own. It's a very loosely affiliated group of individual stores that are owned by one person. There's not like, most people don't have employees. They maybe have one employee other than it's not like, it's not something that's easily changed from without in it by any means. So I think, where Arthur and Heather, Rebecca, and others talk about how, as different kinds of collectors, younger collectors with different interests come in, that there's a lot of hope. I think will just change who wants to be involved in the book trade or who might see it as an opportunity that wouldn't have thought of it in the past. So I think that might be a way to create a more a broader group of people involved in it than was in the past.
Are you optimistic about the future of the book
I think so. I mean, I think
and the bookstore, the actual
yeah. I mean,
physical?
I think it's when we talk. I think we talk about the future of the book. I think it's like important to and I delineate maybe between the near future and the very long term future. So I think when you talk about the near future, I don't think anyone's too worried at this point. The Kindle was kind of the big freak out, but
Right,
I think we've kind of, we spoke about earlier, it seems like that's plateaued a bit and leveled off, and people are still buying physical books
yep,
plentifully. And so I feel like the near future is not that concerning. I think Glenn Horowitz talks in the film with more concern, I think, in the long term, in the longer term, and the impact of the internet, digital, handheld devices, other potential distractions, and that might, I think, generationally over time, chip away at people's sort of ability to engage longer form text and these kinds of things, and that might over eventually then disconnect them from reading to a greater degree, and that would cause a shrinkage. Um, and that kind of shrinkage affects the rare book trade too, because if people are less interested in collecting, then you can have fewer dealers and it becomes a less robust trade. And I think that's kind of the concern he was voicing, that many, I think, other older dealers have a similar concern, or other, not even older always, but so I think that how that plays out will be important. But I don't think anyone's thinking, oh, people just like rare books are going to go away, but it's more like what's it going to look like down the line,
right.
and I think the iPhone and the internet and Twitter and Facebook and all this, I think it has impacted how people treat books to some degree. In some cases, it may be a benefit in the sense that books now are like a salve to the excesses of that. And that could be, I think, interesting to see if that increases, that people see books as an important escape from digital time. It would be
I
nice
agree.
to think that that will happen. And that also harkens back a little to what you're talking about now in the moment we're in.
Um, so taking you back to January when you came
Yeah.
out with Adina and you were there for our screening. And we had a nice house for that screening. And we had a lot of people showed up and asking questions to the point that we actually had to shut down the Q&A, and they then mobbed you afterwards with questions, which was an extra. I thought that was a really, for me, it was a very happy moment. And people continued to tell us how much they enjoyed the movie and how much they enjoyed having you and Adina with them, so that they could ask these questions. How has your experience been with audiences at the other? I mean, I know you premiered at the New York Film Festival. Tell us about that. What was that
Well, it's funny to think that that's probably the last time I'll be mobbed by any group of people
like?
for
Oh
quite
no!
some time. Um,
Come back
but
to us next film. We'll make sure you get
yeah,
mobbed.
the in-person Q&As we did through the release of the film in New York, when it had a really good opening week, a great, really opening week actually, I should say, and was going to expand quite a bit from there. Were great, and it was real. I think what was really nice to see was just how much. I think people in general, it's nice to see people respond to your movie and are having a generally, are feeling something, whether it's all positive or not or whatever, but at least they're feeling something. I think, that's what you want. And, but it was just in a larger sense, I think nice to see the degree of passion people have for books still. And, you know, that sort of, I think when it goes back to your question, what's the future hold? I feel like the movie in some way itself is a kind of little tests in that regard. And if people are showing their passion in these Q&As, and we're learning that passion's out there to this degree, which I think people know already to some degree, but it's just nice to see it materialize or manifest in person. You know what I mean? You read about it, but just seeing in person that kind of excitement is it's very heartening. And so that was very nice. And we've been doing a lot of virtual Q&As since everything shut down, and in some ways we've talked to more people, and it's been a different way to access people, and so
Great.
that's a good thing. But I have to say it's not the same as having a face-to-face conversation and being able to really see an audience and just feel like how people are responding. And so I miss that.
I do too. and I miss the opportunity to, off the cuff, just to exchange conversation. This is a different interview than the one we had in front of the audience, but I think it's a more measured interview because we have the opportunity to think about it and to talk to one another. But I'm very grateful that we're having this conversation. What is the next project you think you'll be working on? Do you know?
That's a good question, and it's a hard question to answer these days because
I know.
COVID is putting so many limitations on your ability to engage a lot of filmmaking, and I don't think most sort of larger scale projects will be viable if there's a vaccine. Realistically, there's no insurance coverage, so the odds of you being shut down midway or any number of other things happening, and then you may not be able to resume, especially if it's a narrative film. And so who's going to put money into something that has that risk factor? And yes, I think we've seen a couple examples of studios backing. I was reading, a project, but the studios can create situations and take risks with, millions of dollars that are, at a different scale, and that doesn't really count for the rest of us. So I don't know. I have a couple of larger projects I'd love to get into. One's a narrative film. I've really been excited to try and pursue for a couple of years, see if we could get that going. But I think it's going to be a while. And I have a different document, sort of a longer term project that I think is still going to have to wait until after this. And then I'm thinking of doing another thing, something around the election this year, a little fast and loose. Maybe we can get away with the limitations. So I think it's this monumental moment in time, and I think a lot of people are going to be obviously filming things about it. But I have something in mind that's a little outside the orthodox approach. So I think there's a great obligation to record the historical moment because I think it's pretty significant.
For so many reasons.
Yeah, for many, many reasons. And it's happening, and then the pandemic on top of it, of course. Right. So exactly. That might be something in the short term, if everything falls into place, that I might pursue. But for anything larger, I'm thinking it's going to be a little while, unfortunately.
It is unfortunate. Last question. What are some of your most memorable, some of the things that you will take away from the experience of having gone through the making of the Booksellers and the screening of the Booksellers that you might want to share?
Well,
the audience premieres, whatever.
Well, it was really phenomenal. I'll just say, going back to the New York Film Festival, premiering it there meant a lot. It was New York, it was hometown. It's the New York Film Festival, which is, I've been going to forever and means a tremendous amount to be a part of. So that was very special. And then in terms of making the film, I think, what's really wonderful is how fond I am of everyone in the movie, and I look forward to seeing them again and talking with them and keeping up, connections. And I had a chance, I think, what was it, maybe 3-4 weeks ago, to do a podcast with Heather and Rebecca for Film Forum in the city, and which I hadn't really had a chance to interact with any of the folks in the movie for a while, and we did it mostly audio, but just for a little while we're on screen. It was just really nice to chat with them, and it was nice to catch up with them. And so I'm very happy that to have that relationship with everyone in the film, for the most part. I just feel good about it.
And feedback that you got from the people who appeared in the film, any comments that were funny, or I'm sure everybody thought it was terrific, but anything that you want to share?
So I have one good one, which is he's never gonna ever till the end of time let us forget it or live it down. But Dave Bergman, who's in the film, who's really a wonderful guy, and has amazing stuff. He's the dealer who plays on all the softball teams.
Right.
And so when we went to film him, it was a nice day. We were filming him, thought we'd get some good shots of him in action, and we got a really nice base hit. We'd been filming him in the outfield a couple innings. Nothing was happening. At some point, spending 7 hours in the sun when we already had, we caught a good moment, but it really worked. It was good. We were happy with that. We said, okay, we've got something really strong and we got some extra footage. That sounds about right. So we pack it up to leave. And it turns out that the next inning, he makes the greatest catch in history, like a Willie Mays style over the back basket catch, diving in the outfield. the catch of his career, according to, I don't know.
And not
So we
on
missed it. We didn't go.
no, I get that. Okay. Well, that's actually, it's a wonderful memory. That's not for him, but certainly something that the two of you share.
But Dan says it's actually now a better story for him telling it than it may be with recording
It's a
the
great
thing itself.
story. It is. Well, I am going to thank you and to tell you that we are very, very happy to promote your film to anybody and everybody, because it is not, it's not dry. I have to tell you, it's a juicy film. There's a lot of fun and playfulness in there, as well as history, as serious, all the things you'd expect when you walk into a library and you look at all the themes. They all appear in your film. So I think that's something that you should be proud of.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me too.
A pleasure. Look forward to seeing you soon. And don't forget us when you do your next film.
And take care.
Bye.
Bye.